Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our weekly creative challenge on Photoshop. My name is Anna-Alexia Basile, and I'm a San Francisco-based fashion, portrait, and commercial photographer. I am so excited to be with everyone today because we are going to be talking about something that I think, a lot of us sort of tend to do with filters, when we're sort of like trying to do like really quick edits on our phones. But instead of, defaulting to a filter, I kind of want to show you all my tricks for taking a digital image and sort of giving it this film glow up and allowing it to have more of like a vintage, kind of like old-fashioned film, grainy feel to it. So we are going to dive right in. You can find your starter files in the chat. And I'd also like to know, like, where is everyone calling in from today? Hi, Robert. Hi, Apurva. Hi, Peter. I see. Oh my gosh, amazing. Hello. Ah, incredible. I see the starter file in there. Wonderful. I love to see people joining in and jumping in on the chat. It's just so fun to get to connect in this way and kind of work alongside people at the same time and move through process together. So thank you so, so much. So you should have, oh, hi, Kevin. You should have, hi, Franco. Oh my gosh, incredible. So you should have your two starter files there in the chat. Jack dropped them in for us, and we can go ahead and dive right in. So naturally we are working with raw images. So of course, when we bring them into Photoshop, our image is automatically going to open up in Adobe Camera Raw. And as I've mentioned before, a lot of the times I make my color corrections and toning edits in Lightroom, but it's fantastic because if you want to work all within one program, you can do that with Photoshop. So this is just a really great starting point that really gives you pretty much all of the same capabilities here. So here, we're just going to go in and make our general color correction preferences to begin. So here, I might increase, my exposure ever so slightly. And then sometimes I like to sort of play around with contrast just to help those colors really differentiate from one another, add a little bit of dimension. I tend to usually bring down my highlights and then bring out the shadows. This piece of bringing your shadow slider to the right is really significant because a lot of the beauty in film camera that a lot of the time we sort of miss with digital imagery is that we lose a lot of information in the shadows. And so playing with this shadow slider is really important in sort of like, we're not necessarily trying to create a flat image, but we really want to make sure that we're not like losing any information in anywhere where there might be a shadow over here. And oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you what kind of images we're working on. These two images are from a shoot that I did for the sunglasses brand, and it's called Cocoa Plum. And what's really special about these sunglasses is that they are made out of recycled medicine bottles. You know, those like kind of like little orange bottles that you get all of your pills in that are like impossible to open even if you're an adult. That's what these are made out of. And so I thought that today was actually like a really fun day to be working on these images, with like Earth Day and everything. And so that is what these sunglasses are made of. And it's crazy to believe because they look so beautiful. There's this like really cool like tortoise shell element. And I just thought it was really fantastic. So once we've sort of brought out our shadows, make sure that we have information in those shadows. Sometimes I just like to decrease my whites a little bit, and then with the blacks, depending on how much sort of like dark space is in the image, sometimes I'll bring that up a little bit. And so here, one thing that you will notice is that when I bring the blacks up, and I'm just going to sort of exaggerate this here right now to make a point, we are sort of getting this like more flat outcome, right? And when we are intentional with this, we can use this to, if we were to like bring the blacks down a lot and we're getting a ton of contrast, that to me is just reading a lot more like digital image. Like I'm going to go in with clarity and almost get this like HDR effect, but I really don't want to do that here. The client was really specific and she was like, hey, I want these images to look like they were shot on film. We actually had a conversation about shooting them all on film. And I was like, hey, super down to shoot this on film. And like, we're going to have to be really intentional with what we shoot. And, we just have like a little bit less flexibility in terms of seeing like how the images are turning out in the moment, da da da. And so, like, if you're comfortable, we can go that route. But otherwise, we could always shoot digitally and then just, kind of tone them after the fact to make them look like film. And so, yeah, Peter is saying, funny how people want film now. I know it's like kind of this thing where I feel like the thing that becomes the luxury is what used to be the industry standard. And I don't know, sometimes I think about this with like AI generated campaigns, and I wonder if somewhere down the line, like the luxury experience is to like hire a real, team that's just sort of like doing everything in a really analog way. So, yeah, I agree. I like also think it's funny and interesting. So, what we ended up deciding with the client was that we were actually just going to shoot these digitally and then, move in the direction of just doing this like kind of like grainy film like color correction afterwards in post. Peter says it's like the return of vinyl. Absolutely, right? Like listening to something on vinyl is so much cooler and it's like this more tactile experience. You're like hearing the sounds of the needle on the grooves. I mean, it's just so special. So, yeah, Peter, I can tell maybe maybe you're like an old school person like me at heart. So here, we landed on shooting these images digitally. So when I was going through and working on the color corrections here, I really focused on trying to bring out the, like most film-like qualities that I could, but then also use to my advantage all of the tools that are available to me when we shoot an image digitally and have this like massive raw file that we can, manipulate after the fact. So once I started here, with the blacks, I actually did decide to bring them up just a little bit because I'm just sort of playing around with like that, film like effect here. A lot of the time when I look at like old kind of like vintagey film, I'll notice that like they feel a little bit more warm. So I might increase the temperature ever so slightly here. And then sometimes playing around with the tint, depending on what skin tone is looking like, I really focus on tint, obviously to neutralize any kind of like magenta or green going on. But because the model is really the focus here, I really want to take a look at what's going on in her skin. So, the green, like moving the slider over to the left, definitely sort of like increases that like yellowy vibe, whereas moving the slider over to the right sort of gives her skin a little bit of like a warmer tone. So right now I'm just like sort of focusing on skin a little bit here, and I am going to add in a little bit of magenta, and then I'm going to use HSL to go in and sort of make those like fun color correction adjustments. So now I'm going to move down to my color grading. One trick that I really like to do, only because we were talking about making sure that we have a lot of information in our shadows, is to really make sure that sometimes we're playing around with the shadow section. So here I select shadows, and if I just draw the luminance up, and of course, any of you that have joined my sessions before know that I am huge on the color mixer. We know that luminance means like how light or dark something is represented. And within our color mixer, that usually always applies to color. But here within color grading, it's really just like how light or dark the shadow, the midtones, or the highlights are. So here, I want to work with the shadows, and I'm just gonna be really like stark here and bring this up. And you can see this is like really creating a little bit of a flat tone. So I'm gonna leave it where it is, maybe come back to it later, but I am going to go to my color mixer. Again, quick reminder, hue has to do with what kind of color we're working with, right? So for red, is it going to be a really cool red to the left? So we're seeing it's kind of going almost to like a like fuchsia-y red, or is it going to be a really warm red to the right, leaning toward orange? Saturation has to do with how much of that color is going to be present in the image. a ton of red if we drag it over to the right, or no red whatsoever if we drag it over to the right. And then luminance, we just went over, just means how light or dark the color is showing up. So here the red is increasing in its luminance and decreasing when we draw it to the left. So here, when we start off with hue, I know that with vintagey kind of like film imagery, the warmer colors tend to be warmer and the cooler colors tend to be cooler. So red is a warmer color. So what I'm going to do is just bump up, the hue here to make the reds a little bit warmer. And then, maybe with my greens, I might like bump that up just slightly, only because I still want it to feel like a green and not like a yellow by drawing it too much to the left. And then when it comes to blue, I do want my blue to be cooler. So I am going to decrease this here, any blue that we might have in the image. I'm going to bring down, any purple here just to sort of like make it a little bit cooler. And then I am going to bump up the magenta some because I just know that it tends to be, a little bit, yeah, I feel like that just looks so great. So here, then when I move to my saturation, a lot of the time when we are looking at film images, depending on what type of film it was shot on, and also depending on if it's in direct sunlight or in a shadow, like maybe it's overcast or it's, there's like I don't know, like coverage from a house or something like that, we're gonna have like really saturated or like not super saturated colors. I think that for this, we kind of want to desaturate some so that it doesn't feel like too crispy and digital. So I am going to decrease the reds here a little bit. I'm gonna do the same thing with my oranges. The yellow, I am going to bump up slightly only because it kind of gives it that like, I don't know, like faded look, right? Like photos can kind of get that yellowy effect. And then with my aqua, I'm just going to bring that down just in case. Sometimes we have a little bit of blues in the shadows. Same with my blues here, just drag it down some. And then I'm going to do the same with purple and magenta because I just want to sort of create a little bit of like a curve here in the colors that just helps draw down the saturation a little bit here. So now with luminance, I do want to bring the reds down because I want them to be a little bit darker here. And then when it comes to my yellows, I'm going to bump it up a bit because I want the yellow to pop a little bit more. And then when we're looking at all of our other colors, I might like bring my green down, I might bring like my blue down slightly. But what you might be noticing is that like we're losing a little bit of color in her lips. And I really want to make sure that I am not doing that. So one way of fixing this is that I can go back and just, add a little bit of saturation back in here, or I can go in with luminance, sort of like bring out the color of the lips, or my absolute favorite thing in the whole world when it comes to Adobe is our people mask that will automatically select certain parts of a person's features to help us create masks in a matter of seconds. So here I select my person and now I can go in and just selectively choose the lips. I'm going to create this mask and now I can go in and just adjust that lip color to not be something that feels like kind of like a weird, like desaturated situation. So I'm just gonna add like a little bit of magenta and a little bit of like warmth back in here because I just want it to match the vibe of the rest of the image. So that is already feeling really, really good to me. And then of course, as we know, when we're working with film, it's really, really, really important to add in a little bit of like imperfection, right? And the way that I like to do this on here is to add in grain. So you can add in some grain here, sort of play around with like what looks right to you. I mean, really like it's so dependent upon your preference, but I think that it's good to make something feel a little bit like, I don't know, not quite as polished. Like it's okay to have something that is imperfect. And then, oh, wait, actually, let's see. We're going to get rid of this. So we're done with our mask. Okay. And then now that we are down here, we're just going to, again, make sure that we are really bringing out the film elements of this image. So here, I could play around with clarity a little bit, but I feel like it just makes it too crispy. I am going to add in a little bit of a vignette. I'm going to decrease that to create that like nice darker layer on the outside. And then rather than adding the grain to her lips, which is what I did by mistake, I'm actually going to apply the grain to the entire image. So here, once I start to add in the grain, you can just sort of see that we're adding in kind of like imperfection in the skin texture, right? Like along the collarbone, which I really like and think is like a really great tool when you are trying to create sort of this like overall film effect. Now I'm going to go in and say, okay, what like overall adjustments am I missing now that I have this image that, feels like it has gotten to this point where we've added grain, we've played around with the colors to sort of like vintage eyes them. And so here, I'm just going to go ahead and just warm this up a little bit because I want it to feel like an image that is sort of faded over time. And then when I go back down here, let's play around with that luminance option again within our shadows. So under color grading, you want to make sure that you have selected shadows specifically, not any of these other ones. So this dark circle, and then you can go in and just sort of play around with it here. I find that this tends to just add a little bit of like this like film-like flat quality that I find really appealing. And then to me, that is looking like an image that is toned really well for, this sort of like final film output. I'm seeing people talking about the recyclable elements for the sunglasses. And yes, it's true, Penny. We really do try our best to maximize how many times we can use these products so that they're not just, a single-use plastic that we throw away. And Peter is saying that he likes when it's made into newer products like these glasses. Yes, completely agree. I wish everything that I could buy was completely recycled. I try to do that a lot with my clothes. So Peter's saying, do you ever add grain to this film look? Yes, we just added grain. Maybe there's a little bit of delay in the chat. So now that we have added the grain and I feel like it's in a good place, we can go in and sort of generally do the same thing to this image, right? Like we can make our general color corrections here. I'm just sort of going to go in here, bring out the shadows. I'm sort of going to move quickly because we're in, the last little bit of our session. And in here, I am going to bump up the contrast a little bit though. These I love. I'm obsessed with the fact that they have blue lenses. I feel like that just looks so, so cool. I'm going to go back down to my favorite thing ever and work within Color Mixer. And here, with hue, we're just going to sort of like warm our warm colors a little bit, cool down our cool colors a little bit. With the green, I actually think I want I want the leaves to be a little bit warmer because I want it to feel like this like sunny, faded, vintage situation. And then I do want the rim of the recycled bottles to pop. So I am going to bump up the orange here just a smidge, just because that's the element that we're really featuring in this product and I want it to stand out. So even though a lot of the time I send to sort of like desaturate elements of an image to give it that film-like quality, I really want the glasses to be this like standout feature that people notice that the eye is drawn to. So I am really trying to draw the eye to it by increasing the saturation. Here with luminance, maybe we want to play around with bringing out information around her eyes here with the blue, or if you wanted to hide the eyes, you could decrease it a little bit. I actually really like where everything is in this shot. I could go in and make adjustments to her lips, but honestly, I feel like she's looking really, really good. Maybe I'll like bring in the highlights just a smidge here, just to get it like a little bit darker, bump up the shadows again. One thing that you might notice when I'm toning my images is that I'm really not going a linear fashion. I'm not starting at the top and then getting my exposure right and contrast and then highlights and never revisiting them again. The process is really different for everyone, but for me personally, I tend to sort of go down the line and then say, I feel like I can zhuzh this thing to make it a little bit better. Like, let's play around with this area. And that's just something that I tend to do in my process. I don't know, do any of you jump around when you are editing and say like, oh, I'm going to come back to this thing? Like it's just never, not necessarily perfect the first time around. So we're going to scroll down here, add in our grain, right? Because we like really need that grainy look, maybe a tiny bit of texture. And I mean, I feel like these are looking really good. So let's go ahead and open them out of Camera Raw and just directly into Photoshop. Maybe I'll bump up the heat a little bit here, even though I kind of like that blue cool tone ruling the set. So let's open these up. Once we open them up, this is the part where we actually get to really play around with, the advantages that we have to us when we are working with digital photos that we want to make look like film. So here, what you might notice is that we love the greenery, right? Like we really like how it's almost creating like framing of its own, right? We have these like soft leaves that are in the foreground that are just sort of like almost creating a vignette around the image that helps sort of like curve the eye into this like swirl that brings you into the glasses. But I'm not really loving this big old piece of green that's just like cutting directly through the glasses. So let's give it a try and use our, favorite little Jen Phil bestie and see if she is going to hook us up today. So here I am using the patch tool to just really make like a super light outline here and select the thing that I want to remove. So once I've selected it, I'm just going to click on generative fill, generate. We're just trying to get rid of that section. And then we get to wait and see what comes out. And if, generative fill is going to do us a solid today. Oh, okay. Incredible. So look at that. If we look here at our various options, we can see that it's done a really good job of recognizing the edge of the glasses. And look, when we zoom in, it's even sort of captured like I don't know what this would be called, but like the thickness of the glasses, just like the width here. So not only is it capturing the front face, but it's doing a really good job of getting the width as well. So here, I like that. I feel like that first one has a really great dimensionality. And I think it looks fantastic. We can do the same thing for this one here. Let's just see if we can get rid of this gorgeous line that we love in almost every other situation except for this, because we really want the focus of the image to be a different, a different part. So we're going to try to get rid of that section and boom, it looks incredible. Like her hair is filled in, the leaf is filled in, we get information on the tree, and I think it looks phenomenal. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when we are adding in grain, sometimes it can sort of mess around with, like texture on the skin, which can be something that we might not be trying to highlight, especially if we're working on any kind of like beauty or like portrait imagery. So if we want, we can go in and, just sort of like carefully remove any like unwanted areas. This model is absolutely incredible and literal perfection and has like, I mean, it almost feels like illegal to change anything on her because she really is just incredible. She's a really wonderful person. But here, just for the sake of showing you how to do stuff, we're just going to go in, use our spot healing brush, and let's get rid of like literally, oops, that's right. I need to have my background selected. And let's just get rid of like that one tiny little blemish just for the sake of showing you how to do something. So, maybe if there was like some other area that we wanted to get rid of, any kind of like, weird, like maybe she had like a scrape or something, we could easily remove that here. But we really don't have to because she is honestly looking absolutely fabulous and perfect. Maybe sometimes there might be like a piece of, someone's bangs that I would want to fill in, but here the hairstyle and everything just really lends itself to what we are working on. I don't typically like to remove people's freckles, but here I'm just showing you again how we have the option to sort of create, whatever it is that we're going for when we are working digitally. If I wanted to remove a little bit of the shine here, I could play around with that too. Let's see if we can get it to look interesting. All right, cool. So there you have it. We used, Adobe Camera Raw to tone our images and give them that film-like effect. And then when we brought them into Photoshop, we were able to use generative fill and our retouching tools to just sort of highlight how we can remove unwanted elements from our images and really just elevate that final product and get it to where we are trying to be. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will be back next week at the same time for our last February creative challenge on Photoshop. We're going to be working with fashion photography, and I can't wait to see you then. Thanks for joining. Bye.